All right, this is 5.1, Algebraic Expressions. I'm going to go through the terminology real quickly. First of all, we need to understand what algebra is. Algebra is just math involving unknowns that we replace with a letter. In this case, we call that letter a variable. So the variable is the first word I want you to know. It's a letter that takes the place of an unknown quantity. And now you might remember in grade school when they might say something like 7 plus an empty box equals 10, and that empty box is an unknown, so we have to go find it, and of course that answer is 3. All we're saying is now we're gonna replace that with, instead of an empty box, a letter. That letter is a variable that just takes the place of an unknown quantity, or a quantity that tends to vary or change quite a bit, like in a formula. Okay. An algebraic expression is an expression that contains variables. That's what makes it algebraic. Numbers and operations. So now we're saying, now this thing that I wrote up here is called an algebraic equation because it has an equal sign. The difference is if I take out the equal sign and what it's equal to, now I have 7 plus m. That is what we call an algebraic expression. Okay, it contains variables, numbers, operations. Terms are what I consider chunks of math separated by addition or subtraction signs. So in the example that I gave, 7 would be a term and m would be a term. That's a two-term algebraic expression. And once again, I want to remind you they're separated by addition or subtraction signs. Of course, in my class, I'm going to have you do leave, change, opposite, and then they'll just be separated by addition signs. So constant. A constant is a term that is just a number. So in that case, that 7 is a term because it's separated by an addition sign, and it's just a number, okay? That means that 7 is always worth 7. It remains what we call constant. It does not change, right? And then one other thing, this, by the way, is called a variable term because it has a letter in it, and the coefficient is the number multiplied by a variable in a variable term. On that one, there's just 1m. There's an understood 1m, so if I wrote that understood 1 in, I could say, okay, well, there's 7 plus 1m. In that case, the coefficient would be 1. Let me write another one of those. If I were to write 5g plus 9, so let's talk about that. It's a algebraic expression because it has a letter. That's your variable, so that g is the variable, right? It has two terms. 5g is a term and 9 is a term because they're separated with an addition. That 9 is what we consider a constant. It's always worth 9. And this is a variable term of which the 5 is the coefficient. That's how many g's you have. Basically, if I wrote this all out, you'd have a g plus 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 a 9, right? But repetitive addition is what we call multiplication. That's why we write 5 next to g, and that means 5 times g. So our coefficient is 5. Our letter, which is our variable, is g. Our 9 is our constant term. So now let's practice with that a little bit, just kind of identifying those pieces. On that first one up the top, I have two terms. 5c is a term, 8 is a term. That 8 is what we call a constant, right? The c is called a variable, and that 5 is called a coefficient. So I have a two-term algebraic expression with a coefficient of 5, a variable c, and a constant of 8. On that second one, let me do leave, change, opposite. Now when I look at that, I have two terms. 9c is a variable term and negative 2g is a variable term. There is no constant term this time. This time I have two different variables, c and g, and I have two different coefficients. I have 9 is the coefficient for c and negative 2 is the coefficient for g. If we go to the next one, leave, change, opposite. I have a constant term, 14, and I have a variable term, negative 3w, so I have two terms. It's an algebraic expression. My coefficient is negative 3. My constant is 14. The next one is a little bit odd. I'm not sure what I meant by typing that in, except that this would not be a variable expression anymore because there's no letter. So I'm going to put in a letter. I'm going to put in a G right there. Now I would do leave, change, opposite. I would do what is called the distributive property, which makes that an 8G and a negative 120. And now I would be in a two-term algebraic expression. Algebraic because it has a letter. This is your variable term, 8g. This is your constant term, and your 8 is your coefficient. All right, on the last one, it may look like several terms, but really this is just one big chunk of math. You might say, well, there I see the addition. Yeah, but that's all involved in one big grouping symbol, so that's really just one term. The coefficient is an understood 1 up here, right? That 6 is a constant, okay? And then we need to divide that whole thing by 2. So what we are going to do next is we're going to take these and kind of evaluate them if we know the letter. So let's go back to that first one. Let's say that we know that C equals -3. So we want to evaluate when C equals -3. Remember to substitute, and I like to put them in parentheses. So if you don't put them in parentheses, it will look like this: 5, -3, plus 8, and some people will think it's 5 minus 3. So I put them in parentheses so you know to do it in order of operations that it means multiply. So I would try to do my grouping symbol. There's nothing to be done. There are no exponents. I go on to multiplication. One negative makes it negative. And then you're into addition and subtraction. Those have different signs, so you subtract sign of the larger. All right, the next one we're going to say that C equals 5 and G equals -2. And what they will generally say is evaluate. Evaluate just means give the value of, right, when we know what the letters are worth, okay, the values of the letters. So let me substitute. That'd be 9 right next to 5 minus 2 right next to -2. First thing I'm going to do is leave, change, opposite. I'm going to try to do grouping symbols first. Nothing can be done. There are no exponents. I go into multiplication and division, left to right. That's 45. That's 2 negatives, which makes it positive 4. And the value would be 49 when C equals 5 and G equals -2. All right, next one we're going to solve this algebraic expression or evaluate it when W equals 5. So 14 minus 3. Don't forget to put it in parentheses when you substitute. Leave, change, opposite. Try to do your grouping symbol. Can't. There's nothing to be done. Exponents, we don't have any. Multiplication, division. 1 negative makes that negative. And finally, you're into an addition subtraction problem. They're fighting. The negatives win it by 1. Evaluate when G equals 10. So let me substitute. That'd be 4 times 2 times 10 minus 30. Now we can do our grouping symbols first. Inside that grouping symbol, I would try to do my grouping symbol. I'm going to do leave, change, opposite. Nothing to be done, so I multiply. 2 times 10 is 20. 20 plus -30 is -10. Because they fight. And the negatives went up by 10. And now I have a 4 right next to a -10. That's 1 negative in that problem. So your answer is -40. All right, evaluate when F equals -14. So -14 plus 6 divided by 2. This is a grouping symbol, so you would try to do the top in order of operation, the bottom in order of operation, and then divide it. So on the top, all there is an addition problem. They have different signs. The negatives win it by 8 when they fight. Now you have a division problem with 1 negative, so your answer is -4. One other skill for this chapter is to make sure that we understand what it means to define a variable. So when I read this problem, it says, this year I'm giving my brother-in-law a subscription to the Jelly of the Month Club. The cost is a $20 subscription fee plus $8 each month. I want to point out this word right here because it really helps you identify a coefficient most of the time, because it's 8 for each month. That means 8 times the number of months. So when I read through this problem, I realize that this $20 is a non-negotiable thing that happens for everybody, right? You have to pay this $20. That's what we call a constant term, right? There's your constant. Then I have this $8 for each month. And by the way, it does say plus, so I'm going to add to it. That means that helps you know that this is a term because we're going to be adding 2 things. And this next thing that I'm going to put down here will also be a term. Okay, so $20 is my constant plus $8 for each month, and I don't know the number of months, and since that's the question mark, the thing that we don't know, we need to define a variable. I'm going to put M, that's why we use different letters, try to make that letter make sense to you. So in this case, when I say define a variable, I'm saying let M be the number of months. And now I have identified what m stands for. So 20 plus 8 times m, and m stands for the number of months. Remember, your 8 is your coefficient, your m is your variable. Now we have this, and if I gave you a number to put in there, like maybe I said, okay, I decided I'm going to order it for him for 6 months, I could substitute for that, knowing a specific number of months, solve it. I would have to multiply before I added, so 8 times 6 is 48, plus that constant of 20 would get me a grand total of $68. If I ordered him a 6-month subscription, it would cost me $68. All right, a couple bonus problems. Remember, if things are right next to each other, it means multiply. So that's 3 right next to a 2, right next to a -6. That just means multiply. I have one negative in all that, so my answer is going to be negative. And now I just do 3 times 2 is 6, times 6 is 36. Your answer for that one would be -36. Next one, I would have 9 right next to a 2, plus 2 right next to a -6. Again, order of operations, I'm going to multiply. I get 18. I'm going to multiply. One negative makes that negative. I get -12. Then I add them. They have different signs, so they fight, and the positives win it by 6. And this one I have a -2. I have a -6, and I have squared, so I try to do grouping symbol. Can't. I have to do my exponent first. So that is a -6 times a -6, which is positive 36. And then I have that times a -2. That's one negative, so my answer will be -72. Next one, I have 4 right next to a -6 plus a 2 all over a -4. So I need to do that top in order of operations. So I'm going to multiply first. That's one negative makes that negative. Now I add, except they have different signs. So I get -22. And then I take -22 divided by -4. That's a positive, by the way, because I have two negatives. And that would go in there 5 and 2 remainder, so 5 and 1/2, or 5.5.